So, over the course of the last couple days, or last week or so, we've been talking about populations and how to describe them, what makes them up, why they're important to ecologists. So today we are continuing our discussion about populations, specifically how populations change over time, and the process of a population changing over time is called evolution. So, populations change over time. Now, one of the main misconceptions when it comes to evolution is at which level that change happens. Because while an individual, I personally, can change over my lifetime, I can dye my hair, I can gain weight, I can lose weight, I can adapt to my environment, right? But just because I dye my hair red doesn't mean if I wind up with a kid, that kid would have red hair. Those changes over my lifetime aren't necessarily evolution because they don't lead to changes in a population. Evolution happens at the population level, not the individual level. So, what specifically changes is the gene pool. So, remember we talked about what the difference between a population and a community is. A population is a group of organisms in an area that are all the same species. So, when these populations change, those changes have to be in their genetic information. A gene pool is all the genes in a population. Breaking it down even more. Here, I'm going to make this really big. I'll bring it back. A gene is a sequence of DNA that codes for a particular trait. So, if we think about this population in this classroom right now, if we look specifically at hair, right? We have people with curly hair and we have people with straight hair. That means our gene pool includes the gene for curly hair and includes the gene for straight hair. So they're different. The trait in general would be hair type, this type of gene, or the allele, if we're getting super technical, would be what type of hair you have, curly or straight. So a gene pool is a combination of all of the genes for all of the traits, period, in a population. Evolution is how that gene pool changes. How genes enter, how genes leave, how many people in the population have each certain trait, that kind of stuff. So, where is this? Evolution often leads to changes in behavior, or appearance from generation to generation. So if a frog, right, is born with a special ability that its brothers and sisters don't have that allow it to camouflage into its environment, that frog is more likely to survive than its brethren because it has that ability to camouflage. So that frog that had that better ability is more likely to have babies. So then all of those babies would have that camouflage gene, or the babies that do get that camouflage gene are more likely to survive and have babies that way. So that is how a gene kind of translates through generations. We're going to talk a little bit more about how that works. Everybody okay? No? Is something confusing? No? Okay. I'll clear it up in a moment, talking about how it happens. And if you're still confused after that, I will re-go over this. Yes. All right. I'm so sorry. Choked on my own spit and just deafened the e-learners. So, there are 4 mechanisms to evolution. 4? Yes, 4 mechanisms for evolution, or ways that evolution happens. I'm used to teaching evolution over the course of a couple months rather than a singular day. So if I get ahead of myself or behind myself, that is why. But we're just going to briefly go over the entire process. The first way that evolution can happen is through mutation. Mutations are changes in DNA that give rise to genetic variation among individuals when passed on to the next generation. That's evolution. So, like with that frog camo example, if a baby frog is born with a change in their DNA that helps them change their color to blend in with their environments, that change has to be heritable or has to be in DNA for them to be able to pass it on. So, if I were to dye my hair red, my kids would not have red hair, therefore, that is not a heritable trait. So that if that made it me more likely to reproduce, that wouldn't necessarily be like a mutation or evolution. But if it's a change in DNA, so something happened during reproduction, a couple base pairs changed, and that led to a frog being more a color that is more selected for that, and that gets passed down to the next generation. That would be evolution through mutation. The next mechanism we are going to call migration or gene flow. We talked about the difference between immigration and emigration and how those compared and contrast to migration in our population size conversation. In migration, as a mechanism for evolution, as groups immigrate or emigrate, as groups immigrate or emigrate, genetic proportions change and alter the gene pool for generations. Now, science in general is usually better taught through pictures. So I'm going to pull up a diagram for gene flow. So, let's see. If we take a look at these two beetle populations, right? This beetle population on the left is entirely green. This population on the right is entirely brown. Through immigration or emigration, one of the brown beetles goes into the green beetle population and now can spread that brown allele through this entire population. So over time, this population right here can become a mixture of green and brown beetles instead of just green beetles. Same thing if a green one went into the brown population. It'll introduce more alleles into the gene pool, and further down, generation after generation after generation, we could have like a 50-50 split of green beetles to brown beetles as opposed to 100% green here and 100% brown here. That is if these are the same species, just different colors. Does that make sense? The next mechanism for evolution is called genetic drift. Genetic drift is essentially chance. Something completely random affected the gene pool of a population. So if a disaster or disruption separates a few individuals, that should be a few individuals, the gene pool will change. Again, pull up an example. So, let's see. All right, we'll use our beetles again. So, let's say we've got roughly a 40-60 split of our green and brown beetles. So, or I guess 30-60, or 30-70, sorry. We got 6 brown beetles and 3 green beetles. Somebody comes along and kills 2 of the 3 green beetles. Now, there's only 1 green beetle that can give the green genes to the next generation. So through this random chance that this foot stepped on just the green beetles, there's going to be way less green traits in the next generation. The same thing would happen if you had a population of blue and red birds, right? Then all of a sudden a wind came from this direction and blew this population out. So now we're left with 3 bluebirds here, and then way far away, we got 1 bluebird and 3 redbirds. Now we have 2 populations with very, very different gene pools. Where it was 50-50 over here, we now have a mostly red population and entirely blue population. So this population over here, over time, would be almost all red, especially if that blue bird doesn't happen to reproduce. Whereas this population right here, over time, can only get blue birds. So we're never going to recover back to our 50-50 split. So it doesn't have to be death, essentially. It could just be like a mountain forms between 2 populations over time, or a bunch of stuff got swept away, or if somebody picks up a bunch of animals in one area and brings them to another. Everybody get genetic drift? Just random chance. All right, the 4th and final mechanism of evolution is probably my favorite. And that is natural selection. I could talk about natural selection all day long, but I will try my hardest not to. Natural selection is the process by which traits that improve an organism's chance for survival and reproduction are passed on more frequently to future generations. So, if something makes you better at producing or reproducing, if something makes you better for survival, natural selection will make sure that that gene gets passed to the next generation. It's that camo frog example. If those camouflaged frogs lived to have more babies, then that camouflage trait is naturally selected for. Now, a little scientific history for you. Natural selection was independently proposed by 2 different scientists, meaning 2 different scientists thought about it, published it the exact same time. We usually only focus on one of them. So, Charles Darwin is our main guy. He's known as the father of evolution. Charlie D, as I like to call him. Charles Darwin and the lesser known Alfred Russel Wallace. Independently proposed this concept. Darwin's took off. He published it. That article just like flew off the shelves. We didn't find out that Alfred Russel Wallace published the exact same thing in a lesser known journal until generations and generations later. So while they both did the exact same work and came up with the exact same theory, Charles Darwin is known as the father of evolution, and Alfred Russel Wallace is often a footnote. Just because of the chance that Darwin got his into a better known journal. So, there are 4 conditions for natural selection. So, 4 things a population, 4 prerequisites that a population needs to hit before evolution can happen. Scroll just a little bit. All right. 4 conditions for natural selection. Four conditions. Number 1, organisms produce more offspring than can survive, i.e., there has to be some struggle for existence. Number 1, struggle for existence. Some have to die. If everybody lived, if all of our beetles lived, there would be no way for one trait to survive better than the other. So, condition number 1 is that there has to be some sort of struggle. Whether that be competition or resource dividing or just like genetic probabilities, courtship rituals, there has to be some struggle for existence. Condition number 2 is that individuals vary in their characteristics. If they're all camo frogs in the first place, and there was no difference between them, we can't naturally select for one to do better than the other. And these traits have to be heritable. Traits must be heritable. If I dye my hair blue, I am not changing my DNA. Therefore, if I have kids, I will not have blue hair. I did have blue hair once. It was fine. But these traits must be heritable. If I learned all this biology, my kids won't be born with all that biology knowledge. That's acquired, not heritable. Number 3. Individuals must vary in fitness. Individuals must vary in fitness. What is fitness, you may ask? It's not quite like the fitness we think about. People going to the gym, inhaling protein powder by the gallon, right? Fitness is just how reproductively successful an organism is in its environment. That is, in its environment is a very important caveat to that statement. If you took a snowshoe hare, right? A bunny that is like snow white and blends into the tundra snow, right? You take that bunny and you release it here, it's going to stand out like a sore thumb. While that bunny might be able to survive and reproduce a boatload of bunnies up in the north, down here it might not last long enough to survive. Fitness is how many babies an organism has in its specific environment. Fitness is increased through adaptations. Adaptations are heritable traits, meaning you get them from your parents. That increase fitness. If a bird has a specially shaped beak that helps it break open seeds a lot easier than other birds, that bird has an adaptation because it allows it to survive better in its environment because it can get more food. That is an adaptation. The last little condition, for natural selection is survival of the fittest. Meaning, organisms with high fitness have to reproduce more. If that bird with that sharp beak that can break open more seeds and eat more can't reproduce because all the girl birds think it's ugly because of its sharp beak, that natural selection won't take place. The organisms with the higher fitness have to reproduce more than organisms with lower fitness. If everybody reproduces the same, natural selection can't happen. So, learn about natural selection, but we can control this. Humans figured out how to hack this system, and that is how we get artificial selection. In artificial selection, humans select the traits we like. And breed for them. Couple examples. Dogs, right? Dogs all come from wolves. They have a wolf ancestor. But we were able to get both Chihuahuas and Great Danes. Because somebody took some wolves and they bred the smallest ones, and they took those and they bred the smallest ones. They took those and they bred the smallest ones until eventually you get the little yappy guys. I'll bite your ankles. Meanwhile, other people took those wolves, took them in, bred the biggest ones, and they bred the biggest ones, and they bred the biggest ones until you got your Great Danes. Humans influenced how those populations changed over time. Another example is food. We do this all the time. If one specific corn plant gives us healthier, more nutritious corn, or more corn per plant, we will breed those together and get our outcomes. Over time, we were able to go from these little plants. We bred the biggest ones together and got these plants. We bred the biggest ones together and we bred these plants. We bred the biggest ones together and we got these ones. And then we're like, we need to be a little thicker, have more corn per cob. And eventually, we got to these ones. So we got from this little nub thing to the ears of sweet corn that you see at farmers markets. Because we humans decided that we wanted corn to look like this. So we thought, okay, the biggest, juiciest ones of these, we'll breed together, we'll breed together, and we'll breed together. And we'll get this, and we'll take the biggest and the juiciest ones, and we'll breed them, and we'll breed them, and we'll breed them. This does not take rocket scientists. My stepmom's grandparents, right? They're in their 80s, live down in Spencer. They have a garden every year, huge garden. And every year, they grow corn, just a couple stalks of corn, so they can make homemade caramel corn. Over the years, now they're 80 years old, they've been doing this since the 70s. Over the years, when they harvest a certain amount of corn, the plant that they think tasted the best, they will save an ear from and use that for seeds the next year. And then they'll plant those seeds, and they'll take the best tasting plant from the next year, save an ear of it, and plant it as the seeds for the next year. So over the 30, 40, 50 some odd years that they've been doing this, they performed artificial selection without even knowing what artificial selection was, which I think is super cool. Now, natural selection, evolution, can lead to something called speciation. Speciation is the process by which a new species is generated. So, new species forms. Woo! we get whole new species through the process of evolution. There's a lot of different ways, but the most common is called geographic isolation. Geographic isolation happens in 4 steps. I don't know why every category has been 4 today, but it is. Geographic isolation happens in 4 steps. First step, we have a single population. So, we have 2 mountains. And on that mountain, we got a bunch of critters. Bunch of critters. We can say that they're like wildcat species. We'll say they're wildcats. So, next step. They are geographically isolated or separated in space. So we have our mountains. But I already used blue, so giant flood. Now we have 2 separate populations of the same species living on these 2 separate mountains. Step 3. Is something called divergence. Divergence is when we get separate gene pools. So we've got our mountains. We got our flood. We got our population over here. But let's say that the population on this mountain over here changed. There was a different food source here. So this population here evolved to be a different evolved to have different characteristics. They're bigger. They got different claw shapes. They've got different patterns. That'll take us to step 4. Step 4 is we have a different species. And we know we have a different species because they can't interbreed. So we'll say that flood subsides. And now, these guys are everywhere. These guys are everywhere. But they can't breed anymore. They got 2 different. One last thing to talk about. And hopefully we'll have time for an exit ticket. If not, we'll be fine. So that last thing is extinction. We can't talk about the formation of new species without talking about the destruction of the old ones. So extinction is the disappearance of a species from Earth. Scientists think that 99% of the species that have ever lived on Earth are now extinct. If you take all the things that have ever lived on Earth, 99% of them have gone extinct. That's including like dinosaurs and Paleozoic stuff. This occurs when environmental conditions change rapidly or severely. So, billions of years ago, when Yellowstone erupted, right, supervolcano, or if it were to erupt in the future, supervolcano spits so much ash into the atmosphere that the Earth goes dark. The same amount of sunlight doesn't get to the Earth as we thought it would. Temperatures drop dramatically. Ice age, mass extinction. So there are two types of extinction or extinction rates. I'm going to erase this because I ran out of space. There are two types of extinction. We have background extinction rates, which is just like what happens on the norm, are gradual extinctions. Naturally, species will go extinct over time. Human interaction has increased that rate dramatically, but background extinction rates happen on a regular basis. Mass extinctions are when lots are wiped out at once. Meaning something happened, volcanic eruption, giant earthquake, meteor hits the planet, and it wipes out all of the populations all at once. All right, you have 2 minutes left. There's an exit ticket on Canvas. See if you can knock it out. I believe in you.